My name is Eric Wilford Watson. Sequels are notorious for not being as good as the original film, and often a sequel to a sequel is even worse. The third Die Hard film has many of the ingredients of a sequel doomed to fail. It has the same director as the original film, John McTiernan, but different writers. Except for Bruce Willis, none of the original cast returns for this third go-around. It is set in New York City, a different location from the previous two films, the original film being in Los Angeles, the second film being in the Washington, D.C. area. The third film does not have the character of John McClane trapped anywhere. Unlike the previous two films, his wife is not in any kind of peril. She isn't even in the film. Not everyone likes this film, and it does not have a good Rotten Tomatoes critic score, but it does have a good audience score, and personally, I absolutely love this film. What makes Die Hard 3 a good movie? Why does it work so well when many other sequels do not? What lessons can be learned about how to make a good sequel when so many other sequels fail? The video you are watching is intended for people who are already familiar with Die Hard with a Vengeance. If you have not yet seen the movie, be warned. So let's get into it. First, a quick reminder. If you'd like to support this channel, you can do so by purchasing my thriller novels Judas Kissed and Becoming Quincy at Amazon.com. The first reason this sequel works, and I wish this lesson would be hammered home to filmmakers that so often forget it, is that the main character in this film, John McClane, is the exact same guy from the original film. He is the character we remember from the first second he's on screen in this movie. What do I mean by that exactly? As an example, take a look at the Dark Knight movie, which by the way is another sequel that is fantastic, versus The Dark Knight Rises, which is nowhere near as good. The Batman character has been around forever, and there have been different versions, but let's focus in on the Christopher Nolan trilogy. Batman Begins established the origin of the Batman character and who the character is at his core and his character traits. The Dark Knight, the second film, shows Batman as Batman doing Batman things right from the beginning. The third film, on the other hand, The Dark Knight Rises, does not. Batman has a bad knee, he hurts his back, he's in a weird prison. Bruce Wayne is not Batman for a huge portion of the film. It's basically another origin story of Batman becoming Batman, even though there was already an origin story. By the third film of a trilogy, we ought to know who the character is, and we expect the character to be the character we know. That doesn't mean there can't be a story arc, and that doesn't mean there can't be character growth. There should be, that's good storytelling. But the mistake so many filmmakers make when doing a sequel is to have the main character regress, so that he or she has to go back to the character we know almost as a reward. Superman didn't act much like Superman in Superman 3. James Kirk in Star Trek Into Darkness was an incompetent and arrogant leader who had to earn his command back. In the Mission Impossible movies, Ethan Hunt's character was in trouble with his agency in most of his films and had to go rogue, which is not in the spirit of the TV show that it is based on. Legacy sequels do an even worse job. Han Solo was a deadbeat dad and a failure. Superman in Superman Returns was a stalker. He had a son that he didn't have a relationship with, and many of his actions were questionable, not at all in character for Superman. Indiana Jones in The Dial of Destiny was a miserable old man whose son had passed away, and he was a pale shadow of the former adventurer we loved in the original trilogy. Die Hard 3 suffers from none of these problems. John McClane is exactly where we'd expect him to be in this movie. He's a cop, but not a superhero cop that can do the impossible. He's basically a working stiff. He's on suspension, hungover, and estranged from his wife, which puts him in underdog status right from the beginning, where he was in the other two movies as an underdog. None of these things are a surprise when you watch the movie. He's a regular Joe kind of cop, he's not a super smart detective Sherlock Holmes type, and he's not James Bond. He's just a regular, flawed human being who happens to work as a cop for a living, and despite being the underdog, he's pretty good at his job. That's who he is in the previous two films, and that's who he is here. The next reason this movie works is related to the first. John McClane has not grown beyond what we know him to be. The mistake some movie makers make is sort of the opposite of the first mistake, is to exaggerate the character into a parody of his former self. The original Fast and Furious movie was a fun action film about illegal street racing. The subsequent sequels got more and more ridiculous, where the self-parody became the norm. James Bond was a spy up against an ultra-powerful villain, starting with Dr. No in 1962, but James Bond himself was never supposed to be outlandish. He was a suave, ruthless killer who did whatever it took to take down the bad guy. The worst Bond movies are the ones that go too far. Moonraker had James Bond in space with an asinine laser gun fight. Die Another Day had computer graphics windsurfing, an invisible car, and was just cringeworthy. The Die Hard sequels after Die Hard with a Vengeance fall into this trap. They have John McClane doing things like jumping out of moving cars so that the car could crash into a helicopter. It had him surfing on the wing of a fighter jet. It had him jumping out of the window of a high-rise without looking first and yet somehow surviving. Die Hard with a Vengeance does not fall into that trap. Bruce Willis's character is still nothing more than a regular cop up against something out of his league. Yet he manages to prevail as a scrappy underdog, which is fun to watch. The fact that he isn't a superhero adds to the tension of the action sequences, even if they go a little over the top at times. The third reason the movie works is the setting. Oddly, this is the only movie where John McClane is a cop being a cop in his own jurisdiction. In Die Hard, he's a New York cop in Los Angeles when the bad guys take over the Nakatomi Plaza high-rise building. In the second movie, he's a Los Angeles cop having moved to LA to be with his wife, but the movie takes place in the Washington, D.C. area. Die Hard with a Vengeance has him as a New York cop in New York, which makes sense for his character. In Die Hard 4 and 5, he's a New York cop doing ridiculous action hero things in the D.C. area again, and then in Russia and the Ukraine. Die Hard with a Vengeance has him being a New York cop in New York, which I like to see. The first movie had him trapped in a building. The second movie had his wife being trapped in an airplane and he had to save her. This movie, the bad guy traps him specifically with his Simon Says plot to make him accomplish impossible tasks or people will die. All three of the original movies have Bruce Willis's character caught off guard in a situation that seems beyond his ability to take care of, yet somehow he does. The race against the clock works as a suspense tool in this movie. He isn't literally trapped in a building like the first movie, but he's trapped by the villain's plan, which works fantastically well. The fourth reason this movie works are the characters. Being set in New York allows the movie to have a different set of characters without feeling weird or off-putting. Even though we don't know these characters, they know John McClane, which gives us an instant kinship with them, making them feel familiar because they know the guy we know. John McClane is given a foil in the form of Samuel L. Jackson's character Zeus. The first thing the villain forces John McClane to do is wear a sign with a racist phrase on it in an African-American neighborhood, or innocent people will die. John McClane reluctantly goes along with this to save lives, and that puts him in contact with the character Zeus, who the villain then forces to accompany John McClane, or innocents will die. The banter between these two characters is excellent, and very fun to watch. They start off as antagonistic towards each other, but grow to respect each other and almost are friendly with each other at the end. You know, character arcs. The cops working with John McClane and the bad guys and all the side characters in this movie work splendidly. The next reason this movie works is that the bad guys have an interesting plan and interesting motivations, and the mystery of that is revealed as McClane grows wise to certain clues. At first, it seems like a madman just wants to mess with John McClane, but that is all misdirection. The real plan: steal billions of dollars worth of gold. Not only does John McClane need to stop them, he needs to convince his fellow cops of what is really going on. This creates a great race against the clock suspense thriller, and it creates tension, which is superbly done. Very entertaining. It turns out the reason John McClane is targeted is that the villain is the brother of the original movie's villain. A nice connection that does not feel forced, out of place, or clumsy. Once we learn this, it makes logical sense that John McClane was the target, which helps the overall plot of the film succeed. Lastly, it isn't a copycat clone of the original film. In Die Hard 2, Bruce Willis's character actually says, "How can the same shit happen to the same guy twice?" It makes sense that a sequel would try to replicate the success of the original, especially when the original movie was a smash hit. But that also can come off as lazy. Oftentimes, a slight twist helps. The point is that having some change-up is good, so long as the core of what made the original movie work is still there. Die Hard with a Vengeance gives us an underdog everyman cop up against a seemingly impossible situation where innocent lives are at stake. And he's in a unique position where only he can do what is necessary to save those lives and stop the bad guy. Die Hard 3 does this better than any of the other Die Hard sequels. What do you think? Do you agree that Die Hard with a Vengeance is a good sequel? What other sequels do better? Thank you for watching. Until next time, yippee-ki-yay, motherfuckers.